Have you ever just sat back, watched an online mob form, and wondered, how does this actually happen? How do perfectly normal, rational people you might even know in real life, suddenly morph into this cruel, unthinking swarm? Well, we usually tend to blame the algorithms, right? We blame the tech companies, or the anonymity of being behind a screen, or just the generally fractured politics of our modern era. But what if I told you that the incredibly toxic, vicious behavior we see in digital witch hunts isn't actually a modern technological failure at all? What if instead it's a deeply ancient, completely hardwired psychological phenomenon? Today, in this explainer, we are going to explore this exact idea through the incredibly prescient lens of a philosopher named Gustave Le Bon. You see, over a century ago, literally long before the first computer was ever even conceptualized, Le Bon mapped out the exact psychological laws that govern human beings the moment they gather together. So, let's dive into this. We're going to slowly unpack his work and uncover the deeply unsettling truth about what we actually become when we join the online masses.
So, let's start here. What happens to your mind when you log on? I really want you to think about that for a moment. Just pause and reflect. What actually happens to your mind? Because when you open that app, or when you're scrolling through the trending topics of the day, you probably feel like you are still entirely yourself. You're sitting alone in your room, maybe commuting on a train, just holding a piece of glass in your hand. You feel completely independent, isolated, rational. But the truly shocking reality is that the exact moment you emotionally engage with a viral outrage, an invisible, profoundly powerful transformation begins. Suddenly, unconnected people, who are physically separated by thousands of miles, are wired directly into a single, terrifying nervous system.
Section 1. The digital mob. To really understand this phenomenon, we have to completely stop looking at the digital mob as just some kind of software glitch or moderation issue. We have to look at it as a biological reality. What we've done is build an interface that brings thousands of isolated individuals into accidental, sudden contact around a single trending event or a viral post. And Le Bon recognized that something very specific, and honestly very dangerous, happens at this exact point of convergence.
The absolute crucial point here is this. A simple gathering of individuals is usually just that, a gathering. But under the right circumstances, and this is usually triggered by a violent emotion, a shared outrage, or some massive cultural event, they mutate. They literally stop being a collection of separate users just browsing the web, and they transform into something with entirely new characteristics. They become a unified entity that behaves in ways that the isolated individuals comprising it would literally never ever dream of behaving on their own.
Le Bon called this terrifying new entity the psychological crowd, and by definition, it is a provisional being. I want you to really process that phrase, a provisional being, a temporary organism. Notice the key condition Le Bon outlines here. Physical presence is completely unnecessary. Thousands of isolated individuals can entirely acquire the characteristics of a psychological crowd without ever leaving their living rooms. The only absolute requirement for this to happen is that their conscious personality vanishes, and all of their feelings, all of their thoughts are bent in one single, identical direction.
Section 2. The psychological crowd. Now this is where Le Bon's thesis becomes deeply, deeply unsettling. Once this psychological crowd actually forms online, you have to understand that you are no longer dealing with a group of people, you are dealing with a totally new, unified life form.
Le Bon wrote, "It forms a single being and is subjected to the law of the mental unity of crowds." Just let that philosophical weight sink in for a second. When an internet mob forms to cancel someone or to demand instant retribution, it is quite literally operating as a single being. In that state, there are no longer thousands of different opinions. There are no nuanced viewpoints. There's no, well, let's look at both sides. There is only one mind. The law of mental unity dictates that the crowd acts, feels, and breathes as a singular organism. And inside this single, massive being, something truly tragic happens to the individual. As Le Bon puts it, the heterogeneous is completely swamped by the homogeneous. You see, normally, every single person brings their own unique, cultivated intelligence and background to the table. But in a psychological crowd, all of those unique intellectual aptitudes are completely weakened. They're just swallowed whole. The crowd absolutely does not rise to the level of its smartest members. Actually, it's the exact opposite. The unconscious, ordinary, and most base qualities of the human mind obtain the upper hand. In a crowd, stupidity and pure, raw emotion are what accumulate, not wisdom.
Section 3. The chemistry of minds. This brings us to a massive, vital misunderstanding about how group behavior works. And we are going to deconstruct it using a stark alchemical metaphor from Le Bon. You see, We constantly assume that an online mob is just the average of the people in it. A mix of the really smart people, the average folks, and the foolish ones, all kind of balancing out.
But Laban brilliantly illustrates that a crowd is absolutely not an average at all. It is a completely new creation. When individuals fuse together into a psychological crowd online, they do not just strike a middle ground. They combine to create an entirely new substance, one that bears absolutely zero resemblance to the original elements that formed it.
Let's walk through this chemistry analogy clinically, because it's absolutely crucial to understanding this. Think of two completely different chemical elements, like a base and an acid. Individually, on their own, they have very specific, predictable properties. But when they are brought into contact, they react. Their original properties are entirely neutralized, and a brand new body is formed with properties completely, radically different from the original elements. This is exactly, and I mean exactly, why incredibly smart, rational, and kind people end up doing unimaginably cruel, irrational things when they get caught up in an online dogpile. The digital interface is just the catalyst. Their original human decency is neutralized, and they become a structural part of a new, highly volatile body.
So what exactly are the chemical properties of this new body? Well, Laban lists them clearly: extreme impulsiveness, intense irritability, a massive exaggeration of sentiments, which basically means there is absolutely no nuance, only absolute hatred or absolute worship. You see this every single day, right? An ordinary person makes a clumsy, maybe slightly insensitive joke on the timeline, and within hours, literally thousands of strangers are banding together trying to get them fired from their job. There was a complete and total absence of judgment. The digital mob operates exactly as Laban predicted over a century ago. It is a creature of pure reflex, entirely devoid of critical thought.
Section 4. Erasing the individual. Now, we have to guide you into what is arguably the most terrifying phase of this mental unity: the total, utter erasure of your civilized self. Because to become part of this new body, the individual you think you are must be completely destroyed.
Consider the stark, almost biological contrast here. The isolated individual, meaning you sitting quietly in your home, is conscious. You are reasoning. You are completely capable of dominating your reflex actions. If you feel a sudden burst of anger in your daily life, your brain usually steps in and says, "Wait, let's hold on. Let's think about this before we act." But the individual in a crowd, according to Laban, the brain is paralyzed. You literally become an automaton guided merely by your spinal cord. You are entirely at the mercy of whatever external impulse the crowd happens to be feeding you at that exact moment. You do not act anymore. You only react.
Laban states it with a chilling coldness. The conscious personality has entirely vanished. Will and discernment are lost. Through the sheer contagion and immense suggestibility of the digital crowd, the user simply ceases to be themselves. When you actively join a digital witch hunt, your personal will is gone. Your ability to discern truth from error or proportion from exaggeration is completely lost. You are, in a very cold, objective sense, an unthinking automaton, merely carrying out the commands of the hive.
And what makes this automaton so incredibly, destructively dangerous is that it possesses an invincible power born of anonymous irresponsibility. Think about the physical world. An isolated individual is constantly restrained by social consequences. But online, surrounded by millions of faceless avatars, you become totally anonymous. And with that digital anonymity comes a sensation of immense, almost invincible power. The normal, everyday human sense of responsibility just evaporates entirely. The individual feels completely free to yield to their darkest, most destructive instincts, knowing full well that the sheer scale of the crowd will shield them from any personal accountability whatsoever.
Section 5. Descending to barbarism. This brings us to the true intellectual climax of Laban's theory. If our conscious personality is entirely erased and our civilized restraint is completely destroyed by anonymity, what exactly is left behind? The answer is a brutal, steep evolutionary regression.
Listen to this observation. By the mere fact that he forms part of an organized crowd, a man descends several rungs in the ladder of civilization. I want you to just let that sit with you for a moment. Participating in an online mob isn't just bad behavior or temporary lapse in judgment. It is a literal devolution. You are walking backward, descending down the evolutionary steps of human progress.
When you are isolated, you may be a highly cultivated individual. You might have advanced degrees, great manners, and deep empathy. But the absolute second you merge your consciousness with the digital crowd, you become a barbarian.
All the fixed rules of discipline, all of your rational thought processes, all the elevated culture that humanity has fought so incredibly hard to achieve over millennia, they are instantly abandoned. They are entirely replaced by the ferocity, the raw spontaneity, and the violence of a primitive being.
Le Bon describes it beautifully, yet terrifyingly. An individual in a crowd is a grain of sand amid other grains of sand, which the wind stirs up at will. That is the reality. Just a single grain of sand blown around by the wind.
This haunting metaphor reveals our utter, complete powerlessness. Once we surrender to the wind of the digital mob, we fully embrace the barbarian reality. Let's methodically check off exactly how this primitive being behaves, because it is terrifyingly accurate. First, it accepts images as absolute truth. Think of how quickly a single out-of-context photo or short video clip can completely ruin a person's life online. The digital crowd never, ever asks for context. Second, it cannot distinguish the subjective from the objective. Wild rumors literally become hard facts in seconds. Third, it demands extreme, violent affirmations. Any plea for nuance is treated as absolute treason. And finally, it is entirely incapable of logical argumentation. You simply cannot reason with a digital witch hunt, because as Le Bon observed all the way back in the 19th century, a crowd does not possess the biological hardware for reason. It only possesses raw instinct.
Ultimately, what all of this brilliantly and darkly illustrates is a very somber truth about our modern world. We really like to think that our smartphones and our fiber optic cables have elevated us, right? We think they have made us a more advanced, enlightened species. But the digital interface absolutely does not protect us from human nature. Our modern technology is merely a highly efficient, completely frictionless conduit for an ancient, brutal psychological law. In human history, it has literally never been easier to seamlessly erase your conscious personality, abandon your reasoning, and descend into the comforting, unified warmth of the barbaric swarm.
So I want to leave you with this final, vital thought. The very next time the timeline inevitably erupts in outrage, the next time a viral target is painted on a stranger's back, and you feel that sudden, overwhelming urge to add your own voice to the roar, just pause. Look away from the screen for a second, and ask yourself, next time the digital mob calls, whose mind are you really using?